What if a simple act of kindness was the spark that ignited an unexpected war? Have you ever stopped to think that more often than not, the small choices we make can completely change the course of our lives and the lives of others in ways we never imagined? Picture a cowboy, a simple man with his own flaws and mistakes, carrying the weight of a past full of hard decisions. He's no perfect hero. In fact, he might even be running from something he caused himself. But deep down, he has a big heart, a compassion that overflows in the most unlikely moments. And that's exactly what happens. In a moment of solitude, he comes across a situation that challenges everything he believes in. He finds a native child, lost and vulnerable. Without hesitation, he takes the child in, a simple act of help. He offers what he can, even knowing that the relationship between his people and the natives has never been peaceful. That gesture, however, is about to trigger something much bigger, something he could never have foreseen. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might truly surprise you. Unknowingly, the cowboy just made a decision that could change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. But the lingering question is, did he make the right choice? Or will his kindness turn out to be his greatest weakness? In the next few minutes, we'll explore how one simple act of courage can set off a much more complex power struggle than anyone could have imagined. And the most fascinating part, it all begins with a child, an innocent soul who crosses into the heart of an ancestral conflict. But can the cowboy, with all his imperfections, handle the consequences of that choice? Don't go anywhere, because this story is just getting started. What happens next will leave you speechless. Now, the cowboy finds himself facing something much bigger than he had imagined. His kindness, simple and genuine, became the spark that ignited a great conflict, a war that until that moment he had no idea could involve him. Native warriors, once enemies, are now surrounding his farm with intentions still unknown. The tension rises, fear is palpable, and what seemed like a simple act of compassion is about to test all of the cowboy's limits. And have you ever found yourself in a situation where a simple yet good-hearted gesture led to something unexpected? Maybe something in your life happened, like with the cowboy, that you never could have imagined. If this story resonates with you in any way, leave a comment below about what has impacted you the most so far. I want to know your thoughts on the challenges of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, of doing good even when life teaches us to be cautious. And don't forget to like this video if you believe that acts of kindness can truly change everything. Your like makes all the difference and helps spread this message to more people who need to hear stories like this. If you're connecting with the content so far and want to follow more emotional stories like this, subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll stay up to date on everything that's coming, because the journey of the cowboy and the native child is far from over. Together, we will continue exploring how acts of courage and compassion can shape destinies. Now let's see what happens next. The tension is in the air, and the big twist is about to unfold. The cowboy lives on a remote farm, lost among the vast plains of the Old West. In the distance, the horizon seems to stretch forever, where the clear blue sky meets the parched earth covered by dry pastures. The landscape is breathtaking, but at the same time, unforgiving. The constant wind, howling through the hills, seems to carry with it echoes from an era when the struggle for survival was constant, and choices defined not just the future, but the lives of everyone around. The farm is a reflection of the cowboy himself, simple, without ostentation, but full of stories etched into every piece of wood in his barn and every stone in his fence. He built that place with his own hands, brick by brick, facing harsh weather, loneliness, and the difficulties of life, far from the big cities. His steps, rough and firm, leave marks on the dry earth, as if with each walk, he's leaving a piece of himself in every corner of his property. However, like the farm itself, he is not perfect. The cowboy, far from being the invincible hero that many imagine, is human, full of flaws, contradictions, and a past filled with wrong choices. But it is precisely in this scenario, with his flaws and vulnerability, that a reflection of the true value of his soul emerges, the ability to feel, to act with compassion. When he encounters the native child, something inside him awakens. Maybe it's what he never had, maybe it's what he has always searched for, but the fact is that this small gesture, this simple choice to help someone, has the power to change everything around him. The cowboy could have ignored it. He could have walked away, but he chose to give that human being a chance, not knowing what this would cause in his own life. It is this moment that defines the true essence of the cowboy. He may not have the immaculate morality of a hero, but he has something much deeper and, in a way, rarer. The courage to put himself in someone else's shoes, to do good, even if it means giving up his own safety. His life, already marked by loneliness and the daily struggle, gains a new meaning. He doesn't expect reward or recognition, but maybe that is exactly what makes him great. His ability to act altruistically in a world where many would do the opposite. However, what he doesn't know is that this simple yet meaningful decision is about to trigger a series of events that he could never have imagined. His choice to help that child will become the turning point in his own journey, changing the fate of the farm and the people around him. What seemed like an impulsive, perhaps even reckless decision will reveal a profound impact, not only in the present, but in the future. And what's even more intriguing, maybe the cowboy was a key piece in something much larger than he could comprehend at that moment. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this subject. What happens when, in trying to help someone, you end up placing yourself at the center of a much larger conflict than you imagined? When a simple act of kindness transforms into a catalyst for unexpected change? And what does this say about us, about our choices, and about the impact we have on the world around us? Comment below. I believe that small gestures can change everything. Let's explore together what the cowboy will have to face and how this simple decision will reverberate in ways he could never foresee. The meeting between the cowboy and the native child happened in one of those unpredictable moments that life often places in our path. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky a golden orange, when the cowboy, mounted on his horse, traveled along a little used trail at the edge of his farm. The wind was calmer, as if the very environment had given a pause to the tension that was approaching. It was there, among the vast land he called home, that he saw something he would never expect: a native child, lying down, eyes closed, with clear signs of exhaustion and injuries. At first, the cowboy hesitated. What should he do? Ivar. Child was from a people who for years had been enemies of his. There was hatred, distrust, and many episodes of confrontation between the two sides. The cowboy, like many others, knew the weight of a history marked by violence and mutual distrust. And there, in front of that child, he needed to make a quick decision. Should he continue his journey and let the child's fate take its course, or take a risk that could mean not only his safety, but the very balance of his farm? He knew that, by helping, he wasn't just offering support to a vulnerable human being. He was, in some way, positioning himself as a point of tension between two worlds. The sight of the child, so fragile and wounded, moved the cowboy in a way he hadn't expected. Something inside him broke. It didn't matter where she came from or what her past was. Here was a child in need of help, and he, as a human being, couldn't ignore that. He didn't know what was behind those eyes, nor what the warriors would do if they knew their daughter or niece or any other member of their tribe was being cared for by a cowboy. But still, he knelt beside her, felt her shallow, almost involuntary breath, and made the decision to help her. The moral dilemma tormented him every second. It was as if he was about to cross an invisible line, a line that separated him from what he knew and the unspoken rules society had imposed on him. How could he help someone who, throughout his life, had been considered an enemy? But, at the same time, something inside him told him that this gesture could be the key to a change. He didn't have the answers, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't ignore what he believed was the right thing to do. He carefully lifted her, placed her on his horse, and with a determined motion headed back to his farm. The weight of the decision hung over his shoulders, but the child was there, in his hands, and he knew he had made the right choice. The journey back, which should have been simple, became heavier as his mind multiplied the scenarios. What would happen next? Would the warriors find out what he had done? The cowboy was sure he had done what was right, but at the same time, he felt the weight of a hidden truth that would follow him from that moment on. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject. The impact of a simple gesture of compassion, like the cowboy's, is immeasurable. Sometimes we think the decisions we make are small, momentary, but they can have consequences we can't even imagine. What seemed like an act of kindness, of pure humanity, now placed him at a breaking point between two worlds, two peoples, two cultures. Each step he took towards his farm, the more he found himself caught in a journey he hadn't planned. And the most curious thing, even with all of this, the cowboy still didn't know what awaited him. I invite you to reflect. How many times in life do we make decisions that seem small, but in reality could change the course of an entire story? Are we like the cowboy, truly aware of the impact our actions can have? The cowboy arrived at his farm with the native child in his arms, the girl's eyes still closed, but now her breathing was more relaxed. He carefully placed her in her makeshift bed, which was tucked in the corner of his simple room, where the warmth of the fireplace always added a cozy touch to the rustic space. With a sigh of relief, he stepped away for a moment to figure out what he could do to help her. It was an unusual situation for him, a situation where the urgency didn't come from a battle or the need to protect the farm from something or someone, but from a genuine compassion for a life he barely knew. The cowboy, who had always lived immersed in his own dilemmas and issues, now found himself facing a defenseless child, and that made him feel vulnerable in a way he had never imagined. He didn't know exactly what to do, but he couldn't ignore the bare minimum: a warm soup, a bandage, and the care necessary for the child to recover from her wounds. He took some meat from the freezer, made a simple soup, and left it in a bowl, hoping that when the child woke up, she would have the strength to eat. When the girl began to stir, still weak, but with her eyes starting to open, the cowboy stayed by her side, watching her cautiously, but with an unusual sense of protection. He didn't know what she represented, or what her significance was in the context of the conflicts between the natives and the settlers. For him, what mattered now was that someone was there, vulnerable, and he had the chance to do the right thing. He knew that this simple act of kindness could be misinterpreted. He also knew that taking in a member of a people who had so often been treated as an enemy was not just an isolated act of help. It was a message that could jeopardize not only his safety, but the safety of his farm, which had always been his only and greatest priority. But still, he decided to go ahead with what he believed was the right thing. When the girl slowly sat up and began to eat, the cowboy felt a calmness he hadn't experienced in a long time. The weight of the world seemed a little lighter, if only for a moment. What the cowboy didn't know was that this simple gesture, this shared meal, this attempt to help someone who, in the eyes of most in his community, would be seen as an enemy, could trigger a much larger reaction than he had imagined. He didn't know that. By caring for that child, he was starting a transformation. In a way, he was challenging an entire mentality that had been cultivated over generations. And in doing so, he was touching a sensitive nerve that could lead to unexpected and perhaps dangerous reactions. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Why can a simple act of kindness, something that should be considered simple and natural, actually trigger a series of events with unimaginable consequences? What is so powerful about the act of helping someone, even when that someone comes from a group that throughout your life you've been taught to distrust? What does this reveal about the cowboy, about his choices, and about the true motivations that drive our actions, even when we don't know the impact they'll have? The mentality of putting oneself in someone else's shoes, of acting with empathy, is often seen as a weakness in a world where the struggle for survival demands courage and often coldness. But what we see here is something different. The cowboy, with his flaws and limitations, with his own internal battles, chooses to embrace the humanity of the situation, even if it puts him at risk. This simple act of compassion is, in fact, an act of courage, one that not only challenges his own understanding of how the world works, but also challenges the norms of the society in which he lives. And this is what makes the story even more fascinating. How something as simple as offering food or tending to a wound can open doors to a universe of complications and discoveries. What the cowboy did was just a reflection of what he felt was the right thing to do, without knowing the profound and transformative impact it would have. Comment below. I also believe that true courage lies in the simplest gestures. Let's explore together how this act of kindness can transform everything, for the cowboy and for everyone around him. The cowboy watched the child with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. There was something about her that he couldn't decipher. It wasn't just the fact that she was native, which alone carried the weight of untold stories and old scars between the two peoples. Something more seemed to be at stake. When she first woke up, her eyes were filled with deep fear, as if she was running from something or someone. But it wasn't just that. There was a silent determination in her eyes, a wisdom beyond her years. Something in her posture suggested that she was not just a lost child, but someone with an important role, someone who could not be underestimated. The cowboy tried to understand what was happening. He watched her in silence as she slowly ate, carefully avoiding any sudden movements, as if she was still calculating what was happening around her. He didn't know, but he felt there was much more to that girl than he imagined. She didn't resemble the children he saw in the region, even in the small nearby villages. Her calmness, her introspection, suggested something bigger, an untold story. He knew that if he knew more about her, he might understand what to do next. But something in him, perhaps a raw intuition, kept him from asking more questions. After all, he didn't know how to approach her without risking a defensive reaction. But the strangest thing was the silence. She didn't speak a word, not when he offered more food, nor when he stood up to get a blanket. She simply watched everything with an unusual attention, as if memorizing. Every detail of the farm, every movement he made. The cowboy wondered, had she been here before? Or perhaps, was she just waiting for the right moment to speak? Maybe the fact that he didn't directly question the child had been an unconscious choice. Somehow, he knew he couldn't force answers, that there was something more to be discovered, something that would reveal itself at the right time. As the cowboy wondered who that child really was, the farm seemed quieter than ever. The winds that usually beat against the walls of the house, bringing a familiar sound, were now unusually calm. The atmosphere felt different, as if time had slowed down, waiting to reveal something more. He could no longer ignore the fact that there was something in the air, something that hung over that little girl, something that connected her directly to the tribe, to the warriors who soon might appear at his door. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this subject. What did that child represent? She appeared to be a simple girl, but her actions and her quietness suggested that she carried more weight than her body could imply. The cowboy felt, perhaps for the first time, that he was becoming involved in something much bigger than he had imagined. He questioned himself, could that child for some reason be a key to something he still didn't understand? The truth is, in those small, deep eyes, there might have been a hidden revelation, a connection to the native warriors that could change everything. He knew that his life, and perhaps even his farm, was about to be impacted in ways he couldn't predict. The mere fact that she had crossed his path meant that he had touched something in the great game of life, something that could not be undone, something that in some way was connecting him to an uncertain future full of dangers. The child, in her quietness, seemed to be the reflection of a larger journey to come, a journey he could no longer ignore. The question was she here by chance, or was there a much greater reason for her appearance? The cowboy deep down knew that nothing happened by chance. Every move that child made seemed orchestrated by fate, but what would be the true nature of this fate? The night fell faster than the cowboy had imagined, and with it came the sense that something was about to happen. The wind, which had been calm, was now stirring, beating against the wooden house's windows and creating dancing shadows on the walls. The farm's silence was broken by a sound he soon recognized. Footsteps, not those of a simple animal. The sound was heavy, as if something larger was approaching. The cowboy, already accustomed to the solitude of the nights, couldn't help but notice that something was wrong. It was as if the earth beneath his feet had changed its rhythm, as if the very air was charged with tension. He looked out the window but saw nothing, just the darkness spreading across the entire field. However, there was something out of place. He felt the presence of something or someone watching him. It wasn't just the child he now had in his house. There was something in the air, an invisible but palpable threat. He turned and walked to the door, pulling the lever with a force that reflected the growing unease in his chest. He slowly opened the door, expecting to see what was beyond it, but saw nothing but the shadows stretching across the farm. That's when he noticed the tracks, small but noticeable. Marks left on the dry ground. They weren't from common animals, but from something different. The cowboy crouched, carefully examining the tracks that began to spread across the farm's land. They were wide tracks, made by heavy steps, and the strangest thing was that they seemed to come from all directions, as if someone was circling his house, watching every movement. His instinct, that survival instinct he had cultivated throughout his life, kicked in. He knew something was about to happen, but he couldn't understand what. The fear he felt wasn't like the fears he'd experienced before, facing the farm's challenges or even the hard days of battles with the natives. It was something deeper, more visceral. It was the feeling of being watched, of being at the center of something much larger than he could imagine. His heart raced as he followed the tracks that led him to the farthest part of the property. There, near the barn, he found more clues. Broken branches, crushed leaves, signs of something or someone moving with unsettling speed. As he walked, the cowboy felt that something was closing in around him, like a trap being set without him realizing it. The wind now seemed to whisper in his ears, and the darkness, which had once felt so familiar, now carried a threatening presence. He quickly turned as if something had touched him, but there was nothing but the loneliness of the farm. He continued his search, now with a growing sense of urgency. Something was approaching, something he could no longer ignore. It was then that he heard the distant sound, a deep echo that reverberated across the dry land, the sound of screams. Strange, almost inhuman screams. He froze in place, his heart racing. The screams drew closer faster than he had imagined. The cowboy realized that, in his kindness, he might have provoked something far greater than he could understand, something he didn't know how to face. It was no longer just a native child in his house. No longer just an act of compassion. There was something larger, something about to be revealed. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject. What could generate such great, such palpable tension that it would make an experienced man like the cowboy feel that he had crossed an invisible line? What were these signs, these tracks and screams? Suddenly, the farm he knew so well was transforming into a hostile place, filled with secrets and dangers. And what more was the cowboy not seeing? Was it possible that by doing the right thing, he was in fact digging his own grave? As danger approached, the cowboy had to face the harsh reality that perhaps the risks of his kindness had been much greater than he had imagined. And now, he had to decide: run or face it. The cowboy felt the weight of the atmosphere becoming denser with each passing second. The sound of the screams, now closer, echoed like a warning, a curtain of tension falling over the farm. The sky, which had been clear before, was beginning to darken in a strange way. It wasn't just nightfall coming. It was as if nature itself was preparing for something. The wind grew stronger, pounding against the wooden walls of the house, making them creak as if they knew what was to come. The cowboy knew in some way that the storm was not just wind and rain, but something much more dangerous, something he couldn't control. The sound of hooves striking the dry ground grew louder, now impossible to ignore. It was no longer the solitary steps of a single horse. There were many riders, their steps blending with the roar of the wind. A line of native warriors was approaching, like an impending storm, fierce and unpredictable. The cowboy could hardly believe what his eyes were seeing when he looked at the horizon. Approaching on horseback, coming from the dark hills, a force of 40 warriors, all mounted, their faces hidden by the shadows of their hats, their eyes fixed on their target. They were ready to face anything, and the cowboy knew that he and his farm were the objective. The tension increased with the speed of their approach. The cowboy realized with a growing sense of dread that he was no longer in control. The farm, which had always been a safe, familiar place, was becoming the stage for something much larger. The warriors spread out, surrounding each side of the house, their imposing figures emerging from the darkness, like shadows from a nightmare. The wind carried with it the sound of the horses, the metal of their spears and knives, and the unsettling silence that filled the space between their movements. They were coming and positioning themselves, ready for something. But what? It was hard to say. The cowboy looked around, feeling the noose tighten. He could see the glint of the spears, the movement of the figures, but he couldn't understand what was happening. What did those warriors want? What did the concentration of force around his farm mean? Had he taken a step toward a war he couldn't win? Or was this part of something larger, something he still couldn't comprehend? Now, with the warriors positioned on every side, he no longer had the option to flee. There was no way out. The farm was surrounded, and the cowboy found himself facing one of the toughest decisions of his life. Should he face the warriors with the courage he'd always had, knowing the odds were against him? Or should he try to communicate, try to understand the reason behind the invasion? His instincts screamed for him to take a defensive stance, but he also knew that in a moment like this, impulsiveness could be his greatest enemy. The cowboy, who had always been a man of action, now found himself at an impasse. He knew the warriors weren't just there to intimidate him. They had a reason for the siege, and he needed to find out what it was. The tension in the air was palpable. Every move he made was being watched. Every step, every breath, everything was being calculated. What would happen now? The cowboy didn't know, but one thing was certain. His life and the life of his farm were about to be transformed, and the way he handled this moment could define the future of everyone around him. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this subject. What did the arrival of these warriors really mean? What was the true intention behind the siege? There was much more to this story than the cowboy could understand at first glance. What was really at stake, and how could he, or should he, react? Around him, the situation was becoming more unpredictable by the second, and he needed to make a decision quickly, or else the storm approaching might be more devastating than he had imagined. Could his choice change the course of this conflict? Or perhaps the cowboy was about to discover something even more surprising about the fate he was about to live. The cowboy was standing there, in the doorway, looking at the vast scene before him. The 40 native warriors were now positioned in circles like a wave preparing to take the shore. There was no room to flee. There was no way to run. He could feel the weight of the tension in the air, the smell of the earth mingling with the rising fear in his chest. The wind, which had once seemed like his ally, now suffocated him, as if he were prey surrounded by predators. He looked at the child. She was sitting in the corner of the house, almost motionless, as if she knew what was coming was inevitable. And in that moment, the cowboy found himself facing a moral dilemma he had never imagined he would confront. He had acted with his heart, with what he believed to be the right thing by taking the girl in, but now the situation was about to explode into a conflict he barely understood. His farm, his only refuge and asset, was now threatened by something much larger than any of his previous enemies. He had always believed that the land, hard work and strength would be his greatest defenses, but nothing had prepared him for a moment like this. He knew that by taking the child in, he had crossed an invisible line, a line between his simple life and the chaos that could follow. What would he do now? Would he protect his farm, his life, with all his might? Or would he face the consequences of his act of kindness, accepting the risk it brought? Inside his mind, a whirlwind of thoughts formed. What if he did what was expected? Fight, defend his property. But by doing that, he would be denying everything he had shown up until that point, what he believed to be a simple but immensely valuable gesture: kindness. He knew the native warriors weren't coming there without a clear reason, and he also knew that if confrontation occurred, the consequences would be terrible. Life as he knew it would never be the same. But there was a hidden truth he couldn't ignore. If he chose to act in defense of himself, he would be going against the very principle that had guided him to this point. On the other hand, there was the child. She was now completely vulnerable, and he didn't know how much she understood of what was happening. He wondered if she knew the crucial role she played in this conflict. Could she, in some way, be the catalyst for all of this? But what if she herself was a victim? The cowboy couldn't know, but he felt deep down that his choice now didn't just involve his farm and his life, but also the life of that child. The decision was weighing on him in a way he had never imagined. Logic told him to protect his farm, hide and maybe negotiate, but his heart told him to stay true to his humanity, to what he believed was right. In that fraction of a second, he realized the true meaning of courage. It wasn't just about surviving the battle, it was about staying true to what he believed in. If he were to follow what was in his heart, he would have to risk more than his life and his farm. He would have to face his own choices, the fear of being judged, and the consequences of an act that he knew in the minds of many seemed unthinkable. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The real transformation the cowboy experiences is questioning how far his kindness would take him. When you make a decision from the heart, do you truly understand the impact it has on your life and the lives of others? The choice to be good, to be human, can sometimes be harder than any physical fight. And the weight of that decision? How much can it change the course of an entire story? The cowboy was no longer just an ordinary man. He was someone on the brink of discovering who he truly was and how far he could go to defend what he believed was right. He had to make a choice: protect his farm and his life, or live with the consequences of an act of kindness that would change everything. What would he do? The cowboy positioned himself at the door of his house, his heart pounding. The warriors were just a few steps from his farm, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. He knew that soon he would face the leader of the natives, the man who likely held the answers to everything that was happening. The cowboy felt a mix of apprehension and determination. He had reached the point where there was no turning back. His act of kindness, his decision to take in the child, had placed him at the center of something much bigger than he had imagined. Now, he would have to deal with the consequences of his actions, and if there was a chance to avoid violence, he had to seize it with every last ounce of strength in his body. Suddenly he saw the leader of the warriors approaching. The man, tall and imposing, with deep, intense eyes, seemed to carry the entire history of his people on his shoulders. By his side, the other warriors remained silent, like shadows waiting for the order to act. The cowboy felt the pressure build even more as the leader came closer, his gaze fixed and calculating. When the leader finally stopped in front of him, the cowboy took a step forward, his eyes meeting those of the man who represented all the power of the tribe. There was no denying reality anymore. This moment, this confrontation, would be decisive. The leader of the warriors looked at the cowboy, sizing him up with a chilling calm. There was something imposing yet enigmatic about his presence. He seemed to know more than he let on. The cowboy felt that for a moment words would fail, but he had to say something. He knew that, at least, he had to try. "I didn't want it to be like this," the cowboy began, his voice firm but carrying a fatigue that came from much more than simple physical exhaustion. "I only did what I thought was right. She was hurt, alone. I couldn't just leave her there." The leader of the warriors observed but didn't respond immediately. His gaze seemed to penetrate the cowboy in a way that challenged any internal resistance he might have had. The silence between them stretched on, a pause laden with unsaid meanings. The cowboy felt a lump in his throat but didn't look away. He knew that somehow this was the moment that would define everything. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice low but full of authority. "You did more than simply take in a child. You made a choice that few would make. But that's not why I'm here." The cowboy furrowed his brow, bewildered. What more was behind all of this? Why were the warriors here, surrounding his house? He needed to understand. There was no more time for doubt or assumptions. "Do you think this girl is just a child?" the leader continued, his words carrying a weight the cowboy couldn't immediately grasp. "She is not just a victim, as you think. She is a symbol, and what you did, by taking her in, has brought us to a point of no return." The cowboy took a step back, absorbing the words, but the confusion only deepened. "What do you mean by that?" "I did nothing more than what any human being would do." The leader slowly shook his head, as if dealing with someone who didn't understand the implications of his actions. "You took her in, yes, but by doing so you've placed yourself in the middle of something much bigger. This is not just a conflict between men, it's a clash of visions. You and I, both, are faced with choices that go beyond our individual lives. You may try to deny it, but your action triggered a reaction." The cowboy swallowed hard. What had he done? He thought he was helping, but he couldn't see the true magnitude of what was unfolding before him. The leader of the warriors wasn't there just to punish or avenge the death of an ally. He was there for something deeper, something more complex. He was there to respond to an act that could mean the chance to change the course of a conflict that had been going on for generations. Now the cowboy found himself at an even more complex moral crossroads. The words of the leader echoed in his mind. What should he do? The simple kindness he had shown, his compassion for a child, now placed him at the center of a whirlwind of forces beyond his understanding. He had to decide. Should he remain true to himself, to his actions, or should he try to resolve the conflict that now entangled him even more deeply? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The cowboy is being tested in ways he never imagined. The simple act of taking in a child had placed him at the epicenter of a choice bigger than he could comprehend. The tension between what he knows is right and the consequences of his actions is forcing him to question everything. In the end, what is more important, staying true to his heart or understanding that, in some situations, the cost of kindness can be higher than we imagine? The cowboy stood there, listening to the words of the leader of the warriors echoing in his mind. He already knew that his life would never be the same. What had seemed like a simple choice, an act of compassion, had turned into something immeasurably bigger, more complex than he could have imagined. With every passing second, he found himself more involved in a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. He knew that kindness has a price, and perhaps now was the moment to pay that price. What he didn't know was what that price would entail for him, for the child, for the farm. Would he be prepared to face the consequences of his choice? In that moment, the cowboy reflected on the lessons life had taught him up to that point. He had always believed that courage was about being strong, facing hardships with his head held high, like a man fighting against the wind and the storms of life. But now he began to understand that true courage might lie elsewhere, being willing to do what is right, even when it doesn't guarantee an immediate victory. He silently wondered if this act of kindness would really have the power to change the situation, or if he was, in fact, digging his own destruction. He knew that, often, kindness is seen as weakness, a gap that enemies can exploit. But at the same time, he couldn't help but think there was something deeply human in acting with compassion, in trying to change the course of history, even when the world around him didn't understand his motives. The leader of the warriors looked at him one last time, and without saying another word, made a gesture to his men. The cowboy didn't know if that meant the fight was about to begin, or if there was, in fact, a chance for peace. But as he watched the warriors slowly retreat, he felt more than ever the weight of his choices. Perhaps at that moment, he had done something no one expected, something that could save more lives or perhaps destroy them. But deep down, he knew that, regardless of the outcome, he had done what he believed was right. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. The real reflection here is not about what the cowboy did, but about what all of us do when we face difficult choices. How many times have we found ourselves in a moment where our compassion, our kindness, our humanity collide with the need to protect what is ours? What does it truly mean to do the right thing when the cost of kindness can be so high? The cowboy was now facing the true essence of his character. He was no longer just a man on his farm fighting for his survival. He was someone who, by choosing to do good, had put his entire life at risk. And the question that remains is, will he be able to bear the weight of this decision? What lies ahead will be the reflection of the impact of his courage, or the price for being compassionate in a world that often seems to have no space for such weakness. The story of the cowboy and his choice of kindness leads us to reflect on the deeper dilemmas of life. Sometimes, doing what's right can be the hardest thing, and the impact of our decisions goes far beyond what we imagine. Every small act of compassion has the power to transform destinies and change the course of things. But, as we have seen, the price of that kindness can be high. The cowboy still doesn't know what's coming, but what he has already discovered is that in life, some choices define who we really are. Now, the big question is, did he really manage to change the situation by doing good, or will he pay a price for his compassion? The answer may not be completely clear yet, but what matters is that by following his heart, he has already opened the door to something bigger, something that could transform not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. If this story touched you, comment below and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the cowboy's journey and the tough choices he had to make. What would you do in his place? Do you think he did the right thing? If you like this content, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps bring more stories like this to the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to stay tuned for the next video, where I bring more emotional stories like this. There's another story right here that's going to move you too. Click and join me over there. I'll see you in the next video.